You ever had someone throw you against a wall just to remind you who's in charge? He did it with one hand. My head hit the plaster hard enough to rattle the picture frames, though there weren't many left hanging. The house was stripped bare. Like me, I remember the sound more than the pain. Crack, then quiet, like the room held its breath. And then his voice. You keep your mouth shut, old woman, in a lower, shakier tone. That's what he called me now. Old woman. Not mom. Not ma. Not even her. Just old woman. Like I was a piece of furniture that had outlived its use. And I still had my mouth open, stunned from what he'd said before the blow. I told him you were senile. He'd hissed. That you wander. That you make things up. No one's coming, Ruth. He turned the lock behind him when he left. A pause. Inhale. I stood there, leaning against the wall like a half-broken chair. My shoulder screamed, and my ears rang, but all I could think was, so it's really happening again. That was the fourth time in 3 weeks. The fourth time he put his hands on me, but it was the first time he locked the door on his way out. And that's when I knew I wasn't a mother in this house. I wasn't a grandmother. I wasn't family. I was a prisoner. A bitter chuckle, and the worst part, I still had dinner in the oven. You laugh at how absurd that sounds, don't you? Me too. But I remember hobbling back into the kitchen, checking on the roast like it still mattered. Because for so long, taking care of people was what mattered. I was always the one who remembered birthdays, who stitched the buttons back on, who kept the gravy warm when they were late to the table. And now I was just heat in the basement and silence upstairs. I never told anyone this before, but the first thing I felt after the sting, after the fear, was shame. Because somewhere deep in my chest, I thought I deserved it. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I stayed. Because I let them treat me like wallpaper, like background noise, until the day I became inconvenient. Short silence. The basement window was too high to see out of, but the light that trickled in told me it was late afternoon. I used to love that time of day. Back when the kids were little, we'd sit on the porch and watch the sun melt into the trees like syrup on pancakes. That golden hush before supper. Funny what you remember when you're trapped. It wasn't always like this. I used to be the heart of the family. People used to call me the glue. They meant it kindly. But what they didn't realize was that glue holds everything together until it dries out and cracks. Voice breaking, then steady. He's not my real son. I suppose I should make that clear. He's my husband's boy from his first marriage. Came to live with us when he was 15, all sharp edges and bitten fingernails. I fed him, washed his clothes, taught him how to drive. And when his father died, I let him stay. Of course I did. What else would I do? Family sticks together. That's what I used to say. I said it so often it became a prayer. Even when he started drinking, even when he brought strange women into the house, even when he changed the locks, in a lower, haunted tone. But nothing prepared me for the day he took the papers from my drawer. The house deed, the will, my name scratched off in blue pen, like I was a mistake that needed correcting. That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't see it at the time. Not really. I kept making excuses. He's grieving. He's just lost. Meanwhile, I was losing pieces of myself. My autonomy, my safety, my voice. You want to know the worst thing he ever said to me? He said, "You're lucky I keep you around. Nobody else would." Pause. Breath. I stood there that night, staring at the locked door, and those words kept ringing in my ears like a bad hymn. Nobody else would. And for a moment, I believed it. I looked down at my worn slippers, my wrinkled hands, the veins like rivers on the back of my skin, and I thought maybe he's right. Maybe I've become invisible. But then I remembered something. A sound. Not the door slamming. not his threats, but a laugh. My granddaughter, Ellie, she used to call me the Queen of Soup, said my potato leek was magic armor against sadness. She'd sit at my feet while I stirred the pot, her eyes wide with wonder, and say, "Grandma, you're a wizard." That memory came to me like a lifeline, and I realized something I'd forgotten for too long. I am not nothing. A pause, tone sharpening. I am the woman who raised 3 children, who buried a husband, who built this house board by board with him, sanding every edge with her own hands. And I sure as hell am not a ghost. But that night I slept on the cold cement floor with no pillow and no blanket, because he took them. Said I was too forgetful to be trusted with fire or fabric. He was building a story. The kind you tell the police when someone asks why the old lady's gone quiet. He was setting the stage to erase me. Deep breath, longer pause. I won't let him. I may be old. I may be tired. But I've got one thing he'll never have. I remember. I remember everything. I remember the time I pulled a nail from the floorboard and fixed the fence myself. I remember the way my mother hummed when she peeled apples. I remember being loved. And I remember who I am. So when the morning comes and he unlocks that door again, like he owns the air I breathe, he'll find me sitting upright, waiting, because I've got a plan now. I've got nothing but time and my own mind. And he's about to find out that old woman doesn't mean weak. It means underrated, short, firm silence. Let me tell you something about survival. It doesn't begin when you're rescued. It begins the moment you realize you're worth saving. My life of giving. Let me tell you something about being the one who gives. It doesn't start with a decision. No one wakes up and says, "I'll spend the next 50 years of my life making sure everyone else is okay while I disappear into the wallpaper." It starts small. Tiny choices. A skipped lunch so someone else can eat. Letting someone talk over you at dinner. Picking up the pieces when others drop them. Because if you don't, who will? And then one day, you look around and realize the only thing people see when they look at you is what you can do for them. My life of giving didn't begin when I became a wife or a mother or a grandmother. It started when I was 8 years old, and my father walked out the door with a suitcase and didn't come back. My mother didn't cry, not in front of me. She just set her jaw, tied on her apron, and got to work. And I watched her. I watched the way she held it all together. She worked double shifts, cooked meals from scraps, patched our clothes until they were more patched than cloth. But she never complained. Not once. So I didn't either. I learned early that love meant effort. That being good meant being useful. I cleaned, I cooked, I helped. I made myself helpful because helpful people don't get left behind. That's what I believed. That's what I carried into my teenage years, into my first love, my first heartbreak, and eventually into my marriage. When I met Harold, I thought I'd won the lottery. He was older, steady, kind in the quiet way. He liked my laugh, said it reminded him of the radio shows he used to listen to. I thought that was the most romantic thing anyone could say. We built a home from scratch, moved into a little fixer-upper with rotting window frames and more mice than furniture. I learned how to sand floorboards, how to use a level, how to hang wallpaper without bubbling the edges. I was 23 when we moved in. I thought we'd live there forever. I thought love looked like work. And Harold, bless him, let me do most of it. Not because he was lazy, he just assumed I knew what needed doing better than he did. And I did. I always did. Then his son came to live with us. He was quiet at first, withdrawn, angry. His mother had remarried, and he hated the new stepfather. I tried to make room for him, gave up my sewing space so he could have his own room, cooked the meals he liked even when we couldn't afford the ingredients. I took it all on because I believed that if I gave enough love, patience, space, he'd soften, that he'd become mine. But he never called me mom. Not once. The first time he hurt my feelings, he was 17. He said I was trying too hard, that I wasn't his real parent, and I should stop pretending. I remember I was folding his laundry when he said it. I kept folding, didn't flinch, didn't speak, just folded the sleeves down like I'd been taught. But something in me folded with that shirt. A little crease I didn't have the words for yet. Harold never saw it. Or maybe he chose not to. He thought boys would be boys, and teenage anger would burn off like fog. But it didn't. It hardened. By the time Harold died, that boy had grown into a man who wore his resentment like armor. And I was still folding shirts. After Harold passed, he stayed in the house. I didn't ask him to leave. I didn't want to. He was all I had left of Harold in a twisted way. And I thought maybe this was our chance to start over. Two grown-ups. A fresh page. I made his coffee in the mornings. Paid the utility bills on time. Left the light on when he worked late. I did everything a mother might do without ever being called one. People think abuse starts with yelling or slapping or bruises. But it doesn't. Not always. Sometimes it starts with a look, a silence, a door closed a little too hard, a missed birthday, the way they say your name like it's an inconvenience. I didn't recognize the erosion at first. It was slow, subtle, like a leak under the floorboards. And by the time the damage showed, it was everywhere. He stopped speaking to me in full sentences, started making decisions without telling me. The groceries changed. The car keys disappeared. The bills came addressed to him. One day I noticed my name was gone from the mailbox. Just resident in his handwriting, scrawled across a piece of tape. Still, I cooked his dinners, washed his clothes, waited for him to come home. Because that's what I did. That's who I was. But it wasn't just him. My kids, they drifted. One moved across the country, called once a month. Another stopped calling altogether after a fight. I can't even remember the beginning of. The youngest, my baby, was always in and out of something. Trouble mostly. I didn't chase them. I didn't beg. I thought if I just kept the porch light on, they'd come back. They didn't. You know what it feels like to be forgotten by the people you raised? It's like shouting into a canyon and getting no echo back. You start to wonder if your voice ever mattered in the first place. I used to hum when I cooked, used to sing to the radio. I stopped somewhere along the way. One day the music just felt embarrassing, like I was taking up too much space. So I got quieter, smaller. I figured the less noise I made, the more peace I'd keep. But peace isn't quiet, not real peace. Real peace has laughter in it. It has music and talking too loud, and people who ask how your day was and really want to know the answer. And I hadn't felt that kind of peace in years. The warning signs, they weren't just emotional. My health started slipping. I was tired all the time. Lost weight without trying. My hands shook sometimes. I told myself it was aging. But deep down I knew. The stress of never knowing when I'd be yelled at or ignored or accused of something I hadn't done. It wears on you. It corrodes. And still I stayed. Because I didn't have anywhere else to go. Because the house had my fingerprints in every corner, and I couldn't imagine leaving it behind. There was one afternoon. I remember it so clearly. It was raining hard, and I was in the living room with a blanket over my knees. He came in, soaked from the storm, and looked at me like I'd left the windows open on purpose. He didn't speak, just stared, then turned and left. The silence he left behind was heavier than any insult. That day, I sat for hours holding the blanket like it was a shield, and I realized something I'd never let myself think before. He didn't see me as a person. I was a thing, A duty, a chore, something to be managed until it went away. And I was letting him. I thought about my mother then, how hard she worked, how invisible she became. I thought about how she died, quiet, tired, in her sleep. I wondered if anyone ever told her, thank you. If anyone held her hand and said, you did enough. I swore I would never let myself vanish like that. And yet here I was, already fading, already forgotten. But something cracked open that day, something small and furious. I started watching, listening, paying attention to the way he talked about me when he thought I couldn't hear. She's not all there, he told someone on the phone once. She forgets things, dangerous to herself. Lies, but convincing ones. He was building a case, laying groundwork for something I couldn't see yet. And for the first time in years, I stopped reacting with silence. I started writing things down. Little notes, dates, times, names. I wrote down everything, not because I had a plan, but because I felt something rising in me, a memory of who I used to be. A woman who could outthink a tax assessor, who could budget a month of meals on half a pantry, who could carry a family on her back and still find time to fix the leaky faucet. I wasn't done yet. That was the first time I understood the difference between giving and erasing yourself. Giving is love, but erasing, that's fear. That's what I've been doing for years, out of habit, out of hope, out of a belief that maybe if I gave enough, they'd remember to love me back. But love doesn't forget you. Love doesn't lock the door. And I had been given just enough clarity to know. I was ready to remember who I was, not for them, for me. The deeper cut, what really broke me wasn't the bruises or the insults or even the locked doors. It was the discovery that the one person I'd been defending quietly, stubbornly for decades had never seen me as anything more than a tool, something to be used and then discarded, the kind of betrayal that doesn't just sting. It hollows you out. I found the papers by accident. He thought he'd hidden them well, tucked behind a false drawer in the back of his room. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for my birth certificate. He said we needed it for some paperwork, some story about reapplying for benefits or consolidating accounts. I didn't think twice. I trusted him. I still did, somehow. Not because he earned it, but because that's who I was. Trusting. Willing. But when I pulled open the drawer and found the envelope, thick and stiff like it had weight beyond paper, everything in me went still. Inside were copies of legal forms, a power of attorney I never signed, medical notes I'd never seen, a document from a doctor I'd never met claiming I was in the early stages of dementia, that I was no longer fit to live independently, that I was at risk of wandering off, of harming myself. I sat there on the edge of the bed, holding these lies in my hands, and my body felt like it didn't belong to me. My fingers went cold. My ears buzzed. It was like the world had shifted 2 inches to the left, and I couldn't find my balance. I read every word, twice. My name, misspelled in one place, completely absent in another. His signature at the bottom. A declaration that he would act in my best interest. That he was my primary caregiver. Caregiver. That word hit me harder than any slap he'd ever given. He'd stolen the very role I had devoted my life to. I was the caregiver. I always had been. And now I was the burden, the liability, the problem to be managed, contained, silenced. I don't know how long I sat there. The sun was still up when I started. It was dark when I stood. And when I did, I couldn't feel my legs at first. They were stiff from sitting too long, and the cold had crept into my knees. I walked back down the hall like I was underwater, back to the basement, back to silence. And that night, alone in the cold, I felt something in me crack, for real. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no sobbing, no fists pounding walls. Just a quiet, devastating acknowledgement. He didn't love me, not even in the broken, selfish way I used to justify. Not as family, not as a mother figure, not even as a human being. I wasn't a person in his eyes. I was paperwork, property, something to gain control over. He had been building a life where I didn't exist except as a dependent, a signature, a name that made the paperwork go through faster. I wish I could say I was surprised, but the truth is, a part of me had known. Not clearly, not consciously, but like the way you feel a storm in your bones before you see it in the sky. A kind of ache that warns you something's wrong, even when everything looks fine. The physical pain of it came later. The tightness in my chest, like I couldn't breathe deep enough. The way my back spasmed when I tried to lift the laundry basket. The constant fatigue that sleep never cured. My body felt it before my mind caught up. It was grieving, not a death, but the loss of meaning, of trust, of safety. And yet I kept moving, not out of hope, out of habit. That's the thing people don't tell you about trauma. It doesn't always look like screaming or breaking down. Sometimes it looks like folding clothes with precision, like making lists, like washing your face and brushing your hair and doing everything you're supposed to do, even while the world inside you is caving in. I kept the discovery to myself for a week, not because I didn't want to act, but because I didn't know how. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have access to money. I wasn't allowed to leave the house without an escort. The friends I used to have had long since drifted away. First after Harold's death, then after the rumors about my memory started circulating. But more than anything, I was ashamed. I'm embarrassed to admit this now, but I blamed myself for not seeing it sooner, for being too soft, for letting things slide. I kept thinking, if only I had spoken up when he first raised his voice. If only I'd insisted on keeping my name on the bills. If only I'd told someone. Anyone. But shame is a liar, and silence is its accomplice. It was during that week, though, that something changed. Not quickly, not cleanly, but something shifted. I began to talk to myself differently. Not out loud, not yet, but in my mind, the voice that used to say, "You're lucky he's helping you," began to say, "He's lucky you didn't walk away years ago." I started to see myself in contrast, not just as someone who'd been wronged, but as someone who had value. I remembered moments that didn't fit the story he was trying to write. The time I taught a literacy class at the library and helped a grown man read his first book. The time I stayed up all night with a sick neighbor's baby so she could rest. The times I was the emergency contact, the ride to the hospital, the one people called when no one else would pick up. That wasn't confusion. That wasn't weakness. That was strength. That was love. And suddenly I realized I wasn't just angry. I was furious. Furious at him, yes, but also furious at the world that let this happen. At the people who looked the other way. At the systems that trusted his word over mine without asking a single question. I started remembering things I'd forgotten I even knew. How to write a letter that gets attention. How to contact social services. Where to find the number for elder abuse reporting. I didn't have access to a phone, but the library did. And the library still had public computers. And I knew the hours he left the house. The first step was small. A note, scribbled on a receipt I'd hidden in my pocket during a grocery trip. I tucked it under the checkout belt when he wasn't looking. "My name is Ruth. I need help." I don't know if anyone found it. I never saw a response. But writing it, seeing my own name on paper attached to a plea for help, it did something to me. It made it real. And with that reality came a decision. I would not go down like this. I would not fade into the story he was trying to tell. He wanted a confused, helpless old woman. He was about to meet someone else entirely. The breaking point came one morning when he forgot to lock the basement door. I don't know why. Maybe he was distracted. Maybe he thought I was too broken to try anything. But I heard the bolt slide home, and then nothing. Silence. And when I pushed, gently, cautiously, the door creaked open. I didn't run. I walked. Steady. Quiet. Every step calculated. I went straight to the drawer where I found the documents before. And this time, I took them. I stuffed them into my shirt, returned to the basement, and waited that night while he watched TV 2 floors above me. I read them again, this time not as a victim, but as a witness to my own survival. And I made a vow to myself, not a prayer, not a wish, a vow that I would find a way out. And when I did, I would make sure no one ever made me question my worth again. Baby steps toward myself. The first time I stood up for myself again wasn't some grand, sweeping moment. It wasn't loud. It wasn't visible. No one applauded. No one even noticed. It happened in the smallest, most forgettable sliver of a day, when the sky was a flat sheet of gray, and the whole house smelled like dust and old toast. He stood in the hallway, barking something about the downstairs toilet. Something about how I'd used it wrong, flushed too hard, broken a valve. I didn't even look up from the chair. Just kept peeling my orange, slowly, slice by slice. He wanted a reaction. He fed on it. That was how he maintained the illusion that he still had power over me. But I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. I didn't say a word. I sat there with citrus on my fingers and pulp under my nails and thought, you don't get to have my fear today. It was so small. It would have meant nothing to anyone else. But to me, it was everything. It was mine. And after that day, he never mentioned the toilet again. It's strange how the shift begins, not with a plan, not with a scream, but with quiet defiance. I started talking to myself differently. That voice inside, the one that used to whisper, "Don't make waves," and "Be grateful," and "You'll be alone if you push too hard." It started sounding different. It started asking questions, like, why do you think you deserve so little? And when did you start believing you were optional? I'd walk around the house with these questions buzzing in my ears, louder than the creak of the floorboards, louder than the silence he tried to drown me in. That voice became my closest companion. It didn't speak in inspiration or grand monologues. It just reminded me, I am not done. I am still here. And that means something. The first thing I changed in my surroundings wasn't even visible. It was a spoon. An old one, bent at the neck and dulled at the edge, more a memory than a utensil. I slipped it behind the loose brick in the basement wall where he kept the cleaning supplies. Not because I had a plan, but because I needed to hide something. Anything just to prove to myself that he hadn't erased all of me, that I still had secrets, choices, small acts of resistance. That spoon became my token, my totem. I'd reach behind that brick each morning just to feel the cold metal, just to remind myself that my hands still belonged to me. I never expected that help would come from the boy next door. Eli. He was maybe 17, lanky, always wore a hoodie too big for him. He mowed our lawn in the summers for a few dollars and used to wave at me from the porch when he was little. I hadn't seen him in months. But then one morning, while I was dusting the blinds in the front room, the one room I was allowed to keep looking decent for appearances, I saw him across the street, fumbling with his backpack, earbuds in, half awake and blinking into the morning sun. He looked up, just for a second, just long enough to see me watching. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. But something passed between us. Not recognition. Not even kindness. Just acknowledgement. The kind that says, I see you. It was enough to keep me going for another week. Not everyone welcomed the change in me. The resistance came fast, and it came quiet. The more I stopped apologizing, the more he started noticing. He couldn't articulate it. He didn't have the language for emotional distance, but he felt it. My silence wasn't submission anymore. It was observation. He could sense the difference, and it made him uneasy. He started hovering again, asking questions he didn't really care about, checking the locks twice, testing me with little traps. Did you move this? I thought I told you not to touch that. I answered less and less. My answers didn't matter anyway. They never had. But the way I held my body, that changed. I stood straighter. I didn't shuffle. I didn't look down. And every time he noticed, he'd scowl like he was staring at a dog that used to obey and had suddenly grown a mind of its own. It was around then that I started writing again. Nothing fancy, just scribbles on scraps of old receipts and discarded envelopes, bits of my mind I didn't want to lose, things I needed to remember, what time he left the house, what time he came back, what mood he was in, what lies he told over the phone. At first, it was just to keep my mind sharp, to hold on to reality when the gaslighting got thick. But slowly, it became something more. A record, a map, a story, my story. I kept the scraps hidden in a bag of yarn he never touched. I didn't knit anymore, not since the arthritis got worse. But the bag sat in the corner like a prop, something expected. No one suspects the things we leave in plain sight. Every small victory sharpened me. Like when I figured out how to access the internet again, just for a few minutes at the public library during one of his chaperoned outings. He thought I was browsing recipe books. I was reading about guardianship fraud, about how often it happens, about how many women like me end up locked out of their own lives by people who smile through every lie. And it lit a fire in me, not just anger, purpose. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was planning. I was building something invisible under his nose, brick by brick. One day, I got bold. I dropped one of my notes in a grocery store aisle, right by the canned vegetables. Just a sentence scrawled on a receipt. My name is Ruth. I need help. My son is hurting me. I don't know who to call. I don't know if anyone found it. I didn't leave my name on the list for pickup. I didn't hang around long enough to watch someone discover it. But writing it, placing it there, it gave me a power I hadn't felt in years. Like shouting across a canyon and finally hearing your own voice echo back. Every time he left the house, I stood at the window and watched the world move on without me. Cars passing, people walking dogs, kids dragging backpacks home from school. All of it happening while I existed in this strange, shrinking pocket of air where time slowed down. But something about watching it, about knowing life was still going, made me feel less trapped, made me believe that freedom wasn't just a memory, that maybe, just maybe, it was still out there waiting for me to reach for it. I began to test boundaries, little ones at first, rearranging items in the kitchen, leaving lights on longer than usual, taking longer to answer when he called. Each one was a risk, but each one was a question. Will he notice? Will he react? How much can I reclaim before he pushes back? The answers came slowly, but they came. And with each one, I carved out a little more space for myself. Then came the day I found the hidden phone, an old flip phone, tucked behind a stack of books in the back of the hallway closet. It must have belonged to Harold. I don't know why it was still there or if it still worked, but when I pressed the power button and saw the screen flicker to life, low battery warning and all, I felt something electric move through my chest. I charged it secretly, using the outlet in the laundry room behind the washing machine. It took 3 hours, 3 long, breathless hours while I moved around the house pretending everything was normal. But when it powered on, I cried. Not because of what it was, because of what it meant. I had a voice again, and I was going to use it. The truth I couldn't ignore. The day I found it started like any other. He had left early, muttering something about a meeting, slamming the door like punctuation to a sentence I wasn't invited to hear. I waited 15 minutes before I moved, listening for footsteps that never came back. That's the kind of vigilance that becomes second nature when you've lived in a house where every creak of the floorboards might signal a shift in your safety. I had learned to measure time in silence. So I moved, quiet and deliberate, straight to the back closet, where I kept what little was still mine. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. Maybe just proof I still had the right to rummage, to open drawers without fear. But what I found was more than proof. It was a portal, a key to everything he'd tried so hard to bury. Tucked behind a stack of old linens, in a folder I didn't recognize, was a letter. An envelope, yellowed with age, sealed but unaddressed. My hands trembled as I pulled it free. There was no name on it, no date, just the weight of secrets pressing into the paper. I don't know what made me open it. Maybe instinct, maybe desperation, maybe something deeper. That part of you that never stops hoping for one last good surprise. I unfolded the letter slowly, afraid it might disintegrate. And the first thing I saw was his name. My first husband. My Ellie's grandfather. A name I hadn't spoken aloud in years. He had written it to me. The words were careful, deliberate, like he had rewritten them a dozen times before finally settling on this one version. He said he tried to contact me after the divorce, that he had wanted to be in Ellie's life, that he had left gifts, letters, even came to the house, that he had been turned away by the man I had trusted, that he had been told I didn't want to see him, that I had moved on, that I had asked to be left alone. None of it was true. I sat on the floor with that letter clutched in my hands, the words swimming as tears blurred the ink. I could feel my heart breaking in a way I didn't think was still possible. Not again, I thought. Not after everything. But this was a betrayal of a different kind. A robbery. He hadn't just taken my freedom, my voice, my name. He had taken my past. He had rewritten my memories, erased chapters of my life to fit the story he wanted the world to believe. And in that moment, something in me broke open, not with sadness, but with clarity. For so long, I had blamed myself for the silence, for the absence of people I loved, for the phone calls that never came, the visits that stopped, the relationships that faded without explanation. I thought maybe I'd been too cold, too hard to love, too forgettable. But now I knew the truth. He had been curating my isolation like a gardener pruning a tree, cutting away every branch that reached too far, trimming anything that might bring light or connection or truth. And I had let him, not knowingly, but willingly, in a way that only makes sense when you've been taught your whole life that peace means compliance. I reread the letter 3 times before I could even process what it meant. That he'd lied, that he'd intercepted things, that he'd taken people from me, not by force but by deception. It wasn't enough for him to control my present. He had to own my past too, to twist it, shape it, make it his. And suddenly, all those moments I doubted myself, all the times I wondered why people had stopped showing up, stopped calling, stopped caring, came flooding back in painful detail. The unanswered birthday cards, the Christmases spent alone, the messages left on machines that were never returned. It wasn't them. It was never them. It was him. And it made me wonder who I really was if I wasn't just a widow or a caretaker or the background character in someone else's story. If I wasn't the problem, if the version of me that existed in their minds had been twisted by lies, then who was the real me? Was she still in here, buried beneath the years? I didn't have an answer, but for the first time, I wanted to find out. The weight of that realization sat heavy in my chest for days. I carried the letter with me like a relic, folded carefully into the pocket of my housecoat. I couldn't stop thinking about it, not just what it said, but what it meant. That I had been invisible, not by accident, but by design. That my erasure had been methodical. And the longer I sat with that truth, the more I realized how deep the roots of it went. This wasn't just about me and him. This was about every time I'd been told to lower my voice, to smile through discomfort, to be grateful for crumbs when I baked the whole damn cake. Suddenly, all those memories looked different. The ones I used to gloss over. The way he used to take phone messages but never pass them along. The way he insisted on answering the door, screening the mail, managing the calendar. I used to think he was being helpful, protective, even. But now I saw it for what it was: gatekeeping. Control disguised as care. He hadn't been protecting me. He'd been fencing me in. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after he went to bed, just staring at the wood grain under my fingertips. The house was quiet in that eerie, unnatural way it gets when the air itself feels wrong. I thought about confronting him, about slamming the letter down in front of him and demanding the truth. But I didn't. Not yet. Because something in me knew this wasn't a moment for rage. It was a moment for decision. I had seen the truth now. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending. That night, I made a promise to myself. A quiet one. Not whispered or written down. Just held deep inside, like a coal I could carry in my chest. I promised I would stop waiting. For apologies. For rescue. For recognition. I wouldn't spend another year, another month, another hour, hoping someone would come and fix the life that had been stolen from me. I would fix it. I would take it back, one piece at a time. Even if no one ever believed me. Even if no one helped. Because now I knew, and that was enough. The next morning, I looked in the mirror and said my name out loud. Ruth. And I said it again. And again. Like an incantation. Like a resurrection. And for the first time in years, I recognized the woman looking back, becoming my own person. The first thing I did was cut my hair. Nothing drastic, just a simple snip, blunt and uneven, right there in the bathroom mirror with a pair of dull sewing scissors I'd tucked away in a jar of buttons. I hadn't touched my hair in years. He liked it long, said it made me look more put together. But I didn't do it for him. Not anymore. I stood over the sink as strands of gray fell into the porcelain like brittle threads, and I felt lighter with each piece, not just because of the weight, but because it was mine, my choice, my hands, my moment. It didn't look good, not by anyone's standards, but it looked like freedom, and that was more beautiful to me than any salon cut could have ever been. I started wearing the things he hated. The oversized sweater with the wine stain down the front. The bright yellow socks I bought at a yard sale when I still had a bank account. The scarf my sister gave me before we stopped speaking. Because of him, I now realized every piece of clothing became an act of defiance. A silent scream in fabric and color. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He made a comment, some offhand jab about how I used to care about appearances. But I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I was already too far gone down the road of becoming myself again. I knew confronting him would require more than a new haircut and louder socks. This wasn't about style or statements. This was about strategy, about playing the long game. So I went back to what I knew best: plans. I had always been the planner in our house, the list maker, the woman with the calendar and the backup calendar and the folder of receipts. He used to mock me for it, called me old-fashioned. But that skill, that bone-deep compulsion to prepare, that was going to be what saved me. I started mapping out everything. When he left, where he went, who he talked to. I wrote it all down in a notebook I disguised as a crossword puzzle book, and I kept it hidden in plain sight. Every page was a step. Every entry was a crack in the foundation of his lie. I started building a new world inside my mind, a scaffolding of possibilities. I researched shelters, pro bono attorneys, elder advocates. I memorized hotline numbers like I used to memorize pie recipes. The information filled me with power, not the kind that roars or dominates, but the kind that steadies, the kind that lifts your chin just enough to see over the fence, the kind that reminds you you're still alive. Along the way, something unexpected happened. I began drawing people back in, not all at once, not with grand gestures, but slowly, naturally, like the way sunlight returns after a long, brutal winter. I asked the librarian about a book on tenants' rights. She nodded, didn't ask questions, handed me a small pamphlet she kept under the desk, slipped her phone number inside. Just in case, she said. A woman I barely knew from church showed up at the grocery store one day and said she'd been thinking about me. She gave me a hug that lasted a little too long, the kind that says more than words ever could. I found out later she'd been through her own kind of hell. That hug, that was recognition. That was solidarity. The more I changed, the more resistance I encountered. Not from strangers. From him. Of course, from him. He started watching more closely, asking more questions. Where was I going? Why was I writing things down? Who had I talked to? The mask of concern he used to wear so effortlessly began to slip. He got sharper, shorter, but I didn't shrink the way I used to. I met his suspicion with silence, with stillness, with a kind of patience I didn't even know I had, because I knew something he didn't. I was no longer afraid of him. I hadn't realized how much of my identity had been shaped around fear until it began to recede. It wasn't just him. It was the fear of upsetting anyone, of being too much, asking too much, taking up too much space. I used to measure my worth by how easily I could disappear. But now, I was measuring it by something else entirely, by how loudly I could return. For the first time in decades, I did something just for me. I painted, just a little, just watercolors on cheap paper. It wasn't good. It didn't need to be. I painted a bowl of lemons, crooked and bleeding color at the edges. I painted the shape of the moon as I remembered it from a camping trip 40 years ago. I painted the back porch steps in the way they used to look before he took a sledgehammer to them. I painted until my hand cramped, and my back ached, and my heart felt like it had finally opened a window. That painting sat on my nightstand for weeks. He saw it once, made a face, said, "What's this?" "Kindergarten art." I smiled at him, not warmly, just enough. "It's a start," I said, and I meant it. Each day after that, I did one more thing that belonged only to me. I cooked something just because I liked the smell. I listened to old music without headphones, daring him to complain. I read out loud, to no one, just to hear the sound of my own voice in the air again. I even started saying my name out loud, the way I had the morning after I found that letter. Ruth, Ruth, Ruth. Every time I said it, it felt more real, more mine, like I was calling myself back from someplace very far away. And all the while, I could feel it coming. The confrontation, the storm. It wasn't here yet, but I could smell it, like the way the air thickens before rain, like the way birds go quiet right before the sky turns dark. It was coming, and I was no longer praying it wouldn't. I was preparing to meet it. Beautiful. Let's move into section 7, where the tension reaches its peak and Ruth finally confronts her betrayer. The confrontation is not just about words, it's a reckoning, years in the making, voiced through the same long-form, grounded, and emotionally fierce narrative style. Finding my voice. I chose the kitchen. It had to be the kitchen. That room held everything, every argument, every silent meal, every memory of who I used to be before I forgot myself in the service of others. It was where I stirred soup while biting my tongue, where I cleaned up after dinners no one thanked me for, where I learned to keep the volume of my presence turned down. But this time, I needed to be heard. He came in like always, keys jangling, heavy boots tracking in a trail of dirt, shoulders carrying the entitlement of a man who's never had to answer to anyone. I stood at the counter, back straight, hands resting on the edge, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to feel grounded. He didn't notice me at first. He walked right past, opened the fridge, took out a soda. When he finally turned around and saw me standing there, not moving, not busying myself with anything, something in his expression shifted. Suspicion, maybe, or just the slow recognition that I wasn't behaving the way he expected. "What?" he said, already annoyed. I didn't answer. I let the silence stretch, let him stew in it. He raised an eyebrow. "You need something?" That was when I spoke. Clear, measured, a voice I hadn't used in years. Not the one that explained or soothed or asked permission. This one didn't wobble. It didn't plead. "I know what you did," I said. His face didn't change right away. He blinked, like he hadn't quite heard me. "What are you talking about?" "The letters," I said. "The papers. The power of attorney. The lies you told. I found it all." He laughed then. A dry, humorless thing. "You don't know what you're talking about. You've been confused for a long time. That's why I've had to." "No," I said sharper now. "You don't get to spin this anymore." That shut him up. I stepped away from the counter. "Just a little. Just enough. You told people I was losing my mind. You told them I couldn't take care of myself. You forged my signature. You intercepted letters from my husband, from my children. You made me think I was alone because you needed me to be—" His jaw twitched. That was his tell. The only one he had. When he clenched it like that, it meant he couldn't control the story anymore. "You're not well, Ruth. You're remembering things wrong. You're—" "Don't." That one word, flat, final, was all I needed to say. Don't talk to me like I'm not standing right here. Like I'm not the woman who raised you, who fed you, who cleaned your blood off the floor after you got in that fight at 16. I remember everything, every insult, every manipulation, every time you locked that basement door behind me like I was some dangerous animal. He stepped forward just a little, but I didn't back up. I didn't flinch. "You think you're going to do something about it now," he said, venom in his voice. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" I met his stare without blinking. "I don't need them to believe me. I just need them to hear me." His silence was the first time I'd ever won a moment like this. "I've already contacted someone," I continued. "A lawyer. The authorities. I've given them copies of everything. They know what you've done. They know what you've taken. There's a file, and it's not going to disappear like I did." He looked at me like he didn't recognize me, like the woman standing in front of him wasn't the one he'd shoved aside for so long. And I guess in a way, I wasn't. I was something new now. Someone forged in silence and sharpened by years of erasure. "The house," I said, gesturing around us. "I built this. Me and Harold. Every floorboard, every screw, every coat of paint. You think you can lock me out of it? Claim it like a trophy? Not anymore." His voice rose, louder now, desperate. "You don't know what you're doing. You're going to ruin everything." "Everything?" I echoed. Everything was already ruined. You just don't get to keep the pieces. And that was the moment. The final shift. The crack in his armor. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Because deep down, he knew it was over. Not just the scheme. Not just the control. But the version of me he'd been manipulating for years. She was gone. And in her place was someone who had nothing left to lose. When the tears came, they were his. He didn't sob. He wasn't that kind of man. But his face changed. His eyes filled, and his voice caught. And for the first time in forever, I saw fear in him. Not because I threatened him, but because he realized I didn't need him anymore. Because the leash had snapped, and the dog hadn't run. She had stood still and bared her teeth. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't ask for an apology. I just turned and walked away, left the kitchen, left him standing there in the cold, fluorescent silence he'd always relied on to keep me small. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own home. I felt like a woman, a whole one, and I wasn't afraid anymore. My new life. The morning after the confrontation, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window for what felt like the first time in years. It wasn't just the light, it was the absence of weight. The air didn't press down on me anymore. I sat at the table with a cup of tea, hands wrapped around the warmth, and listened to the silence. Not the suffocating kind that used to fill this house, but a soft, golden quiet. A beginning. Eli came by later that day. He knocked lightly, almost shyly, as if he wasn't sure I'd answer. But I did. And when I opened the door, there he was holding a grocery bag full of oranges and bread. "Mom said you might need these," he muttered, looking down at his sneakers. Then, more softly, "Are you okay?" I nodded, smiled, really smiled, not the polite one I used to give people, so they wouldn't worry, but a real one that reached my eyes. "I'm getting there," I told him. He lingered for a moment, unsure, then asked, "Can I help? With anything?" That question unlocked something in me. For so long, I'd been the helper, the fixer, the giver. But here was this boy, offering without expecting anything in return. It reminded me of who I used to be before I forgot myself, before I became invisible. "You already have," I said, and it was true. His acknowledgement weeks ago, that fleeting glance across the street, had been enough to keep me going when everything inside me wanted to collapse. We talked for a while about school, about music. He played guitar, about how hard it was to grow up feeling unseen. By the time he left, I realized something. Connection doesn't always require blood ties. Sometimes it's built on shared humanity, on seeing each other. The lawyer arrived 2 days later. A woman named Clara, calm and steady, with glasses perched on her nose and a leather briefcase that smelled like old books. She sat across from me at the dining room table, which hadn't seen company in years, and spread out papers between us. Documents I recognized all too well. The fake power of attorney, the forged signatures, the medical notes claiming I was unfit. "This is strong evidence," she said, tapping a pen against the edge of one paper. "But we'll need more. Witnesses, preferably. Anyone who can testify to your mental state or his behavior." I thought about everyone who had drifted away, all the birthdays missed, the holidays spent alone. Had they believed his lies? Or had they simply stopped caring? Either way, it stung. But then I remembered Eli's mom, the librarian, the woman from church who hugged me too long. They weren't family, not by blood, but they saw me, really saw me, enough to believe me now. "I think I know where to start," I said. Getting rid of that sweater he gave me was symbolic. It wasn't just fabric, it was armor, protection against judgment, against being too much or wanting too much. When I dropped it into the donation bin, I felt lighter, like shedding skin. like reclaiming space I hadn't realized I'd lost. I started dressing differently. Bright colors I hadn't worn in decades. Patterns that made me feel alive instead of small. Every outfit became a declaration. I am here. And then there was the introduction. I practiced it in front of the mirror until it felt natural. Hi, I'm Ruth. I love jazz. I write stories. No mention of widowhood, no explanation of betrayal, no apology for existing. Just me, present tense, future focused. It felt strange at first, introducing myself like I was meeting someone new. But maybe I was. Maybe this version of me, this bold, unapologetic woman, was someone I hadn't met yet either. The hardest part wasn't confronting him or gathering evidence or even testifying when the time came. It was learning how to live again, to take up space, to say yes when I wanted to, no when I didn't, to sit still without feeling guilty, to laugh loudly, cry openly, exist fully. One afternoon, I went to the park, just because I could. I brought a book, a novel I'd been meaning to read forever, and sat under a tree, letting the sun warm my face. A little girl nearby was blowing bubbles, and they floated past me like tiny rainbows. Without thinking, I reached out to catch one. It popped against my palm, leaving behind a faint shimmer. "You shouldn't do that," a voice said behind me. I turned to see a man sitting on a bench, watching me with amusement. Bubbles are meant to be chased, not caught. I laughed, actually laughed. "Maybe I like breaking rules," I said. He grinned. Fair enough. We ended up talking for over an hour. About books, about life, about how beautiful ordinary moments can be when you stop rushing through them. His name was Daniel, and though nothing came of our conversation beyond friendship, it mattered, because for the first time in years, I let myself enjoy the simplicity of human connection. No strings attached, no obligations, just two people sharing a moment. The court case dragged on longer than I expected. There were hearings, depositions, endless questions about my memory, my sanity, my worthiness to reclaim my own life. At times, it felt like reliving the abuse all over again. But I held on to something he couldn't touch, my truth, my voice, my refusal to disappear. When the verdict finally came, it was anticlimactic, guilty on multiple counts. Fraud, abuse, exploitation. He would serve time, lose access to the house, forfeit control over my finances. None of it brought back the years he stole, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I won, not him, me. My new life isn't perfect. Some days are harder than others. Loneliness creeps in sometimes, especially late at night when the house feels too big and too empty, but I've learned to sit with it, to remind myself that loneliness isn't the same as being alone, that there's beauty in solitude if you let yourself find it. I started volunteering at the library, helping kids learn to read, teaching seniors how to use computers. Small acts of kindness that don't cost anything but mean everything. People call me brave, but I don't feel brave. I feel free, finally free. On the anniversary of the day I found that letter, I drove to the cemetery, not to visit Harold's grave. He never deserved that kind of loyalty, but to stand beside Ellie's grandfather's stone. I knelt in the grass, tracing the carved letters with my fingers. "I'm sorry," I whispered, "for not knowing, for not fighting sooner. But I'm here now. I'm whole." As I stood to leave, a breeze rustled the leaves above me, carrying with it the faint scent of citrus. Oranges, like the ones Eli brought me that first day, like the ones I peeled in defiance while he raged in the hallway. I smiled, turned toward the car, and drove home, looking back, moving forward, The day I signed the lease for my new apartment, I wore the yellow socks. The ones he hated. The ones that made him sneer every time I pulled them on, like they were a personal affront to his authority. I didn't choose them out of spite, not entirely. I chose them because they were bright, because they reminded me of sunlight on daffodils and lemonade stands in summer, because they said, without words, I am here. Eli came with me to the leasing office. So did his mom, Carla, who'd become something of an unofficial guardian angel over the past few months. She brought a cake, store-bought, but decorated with care. For Ruth, it read in shaky blue icing. It was simple, maybe even silly, but when I saw those words, something inside me cracked open all over again. Not in pain this time. In gratitude. We stood in the tiny kitchen of the one-bedroom apartment, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs while Carla sliced the cake into uneven squares. The space smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. Nothing about the place was extraordinary. A narrow galley kitchen, scuffed hardwood floors, windows that rattled slightly when a truck passed by, but it felt monumental, like stepping onto dry land after years at sea. "This is nice," Carla said, looking around approvingly as she handed me a plate. "Feels like home already." Home. The word caught in my throat. For so long, home had been a house filled with echoes, of Harold's laughter, of children running down hallways, of doors slamming shut behind people who never came back. Now, standing in this small, quiet room surrounded by people who believed me, who fought for me, I realized what home really meant. Safety. Freedom. A place where you can breathe without asking permission. Signing the lease felt ceremonial, like sealing a promise to myself. When the pen hovered above the dotted line, I paused for a moment, letting the weight of the act settle into my chest. This wasn't just paper, it was proof. Proof that I could start over. That I deserved to. "You okay?" Eli asked softly, leaning against the counter beside me. I nodded, smiling through tears I hadn't expected. "Better than okay." He grinned then, wide and unguarded, like the teenager he still was beneath all the layers of responsibility he carried too soon. "Good, because Mom baked cookies last night, and if you don't eat at least 3, she'll get offended." Carla swatted his arm playfully, but her eyes glistened. "Don't listen to him, Ruth. Eat however many you want, or none at all." I laughed, actually laughed, and for the first time in years, it felt light, unburdened. A week later, I went back to the old house, not to live there, never again, but to collect the last of my things. The court order had forced him out temporarily, pending the sale of the property, and I'd been given permission to retrieve whatever remained of my life. What little there was. Standing in the doorway, I braced myself for the wave of memories I knew would hit. But instead of sadness or anger, I felt calm, detached, like I was visiting someone else's story rather than reliving my own. The living room was stripped bare, the walls marked with patches of faded paint where picture frames used to hang. The kitchen counters were empty except for a thin layer of dust, and the basement door, the one that once loomed like a prison gate, stood ajar, harmless now. I wandered through each room slowly, running my fingers along surfaces I hadn't touched in years. In the bedroom, I found the scarf my sister gave me tucked under a loose floorboard. I must have hidden it during one of those late-night moments when fear turned into quiet rebellion. Wrapping it around my neck, I whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular, to everyone. In the hallway closet, I discovered the old flip phone still tucked behind the books. Its battery was dead now, but I slipped it into my bag anyway. A relic, a reminder of how far I'd come. When I finally left, locking the door behind me for the last time, I didn't look back. Not once. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the driveway. And as I climbed into my car, I thought about all the versions of myself who lived in that house. The young mother, exhausted but hopeful. The grieving widow clinging to routine. The invisible woman shrinking into silence. They were all part of me, but none of them defined me anymore. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be free, that I'd stand in my own kitchen making tea without checking over my shoulder, I wouldn't have believed them. I'd have laughed bitterly or cried, maybe both. Back then, freedom seemed like a fairy tale, something other people got to experience while I stayed trapped in the margins of my own life. But now I know better. Freedom isn't loud or dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or parades. It's quieter than that, subtler. It's the ability to sit still without feeling guilty, to take up space without apologizing, to say no and mean it, to exist fully without explanation. And it's mine. My relationships with my children are complicated. 2 of them reached out after the court case, made headlines in the local paper. Their messages were hesitant, full of apologies and questions. I responded briefly, honestly, but kept my distance. Forgiveness is a process, not a switch you flip. As for the third, the one who stopped calling years ago, I haven't heard from him. Maybe I never will. And that's okay. What matters is that I'm learning to forgive myself for staying, for doubting, for believing I deserved less than I did. That's the hardest part, really, not hating him for what he took, but loving myself enough to rebuild what's left. One evening, a few weeks after moving in, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset. The sky burned orange and pink, streaked with clouds that looked like brushstrokes. Beside me, Ellie leaned forward in her chair, sketching furiously in the notebook she always carried. She'd visited almost every weekend since I moved, bringing stories from college and updates about her classes. Sometimes we talked for hours. Other times, we simply sat together in companionable silence. "You're staring," she said suddenly, glancing up from her drawing. "Am I?" I teased. "Can't help it. You're my favorite artist." She rolled her eyes, but smiled anyway. "Grandma, you're biased." "Maybe, but I'm also right." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked softer this time, "Are you happy here?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt my heart swell. Happy wasn't quite the word. Peaceful, maybe. Grateful. Whole. "Yes," I said finally. "I am." She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her sketch. But I kept watching her, marveling at how much she reminded me of myself at her age. Determined, resilient, full of fire. Later that night, as I lay in bed, listening to the hum of the city outside my window, I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. My journey wasn't linear. There were setbacks and doubts, moments when the weight of it all threatened to pull me under. But I kept going, kept fighting, kept remembering who I was. Because that's the thing about being erased. It only works if you let it. If you stop speaking your name, stop claiming your space, stop believing you matter. But I remembered. And now, no one, not even my own blood, gets to take that away from me. Not ever again.